The notification appeared at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. Not a message, not a call. A loyalty points summary, the kind of automated email that lands in your inbox every quarter and gets deleted without reading. Harwood Prestige Rewards, 23 check-ins at the Halcyon Grand Hotel in the past 6 months. Points balance, 47,800. I stood at the kitchen island in my dressing gown, coffee going cold beside my hand, and read the number again. 23, 6 months, 23 Thursdays, 23 nights my wife had told me she was working late on the gala audit. I put the phone face down on the marble. I picked up my coffee. I drank it slowly. And I did not feel the thing a man is supposed to feel in that moment. I felt extraordinarily calm, because I had been an architect for 19 years, and an architect knows better than anyone that the moment a structure begins to fail is never the moment it falls. The failure has been happening quietly, invisibly, in the load-bearing places no one thinks to check. By the time the crack appears in the wall, the damage is already done. The only question that remains is what to build in its place. I had known something was wrong for 4 months. I had simply not yet known the exact shape of it. Now I did. Here is what Diane did not know as she slept upstairs in our Kensington townhouse while I stood in the kitchen with her infidelity summarized in a loyalty points email. 3 weeks earlier, the City Planning Authority had granted full development approval for the Meridian, a 41-story mixed-use tower on the north bank of the river, the largest private architectural commission in the city in 11 years. A project I had been designing, financing, and building under my holding company, Vane Group Holdings, for the past 4 years. Value at completion, £47.3 million. Diane thought I was a salaried architect at a mid-size firm. Her father, Gerald Harwood, had made that particular assumption the cornerstone of his contempt for me for the better part of a decade. They were wrong. Profoundly, completely, irreversibly wrong. And on the morning of that Tuesday in November, with 23 hotel check-ins on a loyalty program registered in my name, I decided it was time for them to find out. Before we go further into Marcus's story, and I promise you, every detail of what follows is worth staying for, we'd love to know where in the world you're watching from right now. It never stops being remarkable to us how far these stories travel. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your presence here genuinely means everything to this channel. And if this kind of story is something you want more of, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing. It takes 2 seconds and it helps us bring you more. Now, let's go back to Marcus Vane and the morning that changed everything. I met Diane Harwood at an architecture awards ceremony in the spring 11 years ago. She was there with her father. I was there because my firm had won a commendation for a social housing development in East London, the kind of award that the industry respects and the Harwoods of the world regard as evidence of limited ambition. She was warm then. Genuinely warm, not the performance of warmth that I would later come to recognize as her default social register. She asked me about the housing project with what seemed like real curiosity. She laughed at things because they were funny, not because they were useful. She wore a green dress that did not match anything else in that room and seemed entirely unconcerned about it. I loved her for 6 good years. I want to be precise about that because it matters. The first 6 years of our marriage were real. The laughter was real. The Sunday mornings were real. The way she used to read with her feet tucked under her on the west-facing sofa, chasing the last hour of afternoon light, that was real. I did not imagine it. It happened. What also happened, gradually, so gradually that I could not identify the moment it began, was the slow migration of Diane's sense of self back into the Harwood orbit. Her father's world. Her father's values. Her father's unspoken, load-bearing belief that a man's worth was a function of his visible assets and his last name's weight in a room, and by that measure I had always come up short. The loyalty email was not the first thing. It was the confirmation of a pattern I had been watching assemble itself for the better part of 4 months. The way a structural engineer watches stress lines propagate through concrete, slow and inevitable, before the fracture event. It had started with a phone call I was not meant to hear. I had come home early from site. This was mid-July, a Tuesday, the kind of dense gray afternoon that makes London feel like a held breath. Diane was in the garden room, the door half open. Her voice was low but not low enough. "He doesn't know," she was saying. "He won't know. He barely notices anything outside his blueprints." I stood in the hallway for 11 seconds. I counted them, then I walked to the kitchen, made a cup of tea I did not drink, and sat with the information. He doesn't know. The pronouns told me everything. I did not need to hear the name. After that, I watched. An architect learns early that the discipline is 90% observation and 10% execution. You study a site for months before you lay a single foundation. You understand the ground beneath you before you build on it. I applied the same method to my marriage. I noted the Thursdays. I noted the perfume, different, lighter, applied more carefully than on the evenings she spent with her book on the sofa. I noted that the working late story never varied in its details, which is the tell of a rehearsed lie rather than a true one. Genuine explanations are inconsistent. They have texture and revision. A story told identically 12 weeks in a row has been constructed. Then the loyalty email arrived. 23 check-ins. The Halcyon Grand, registered to the joint account in my name. She had been charging the rooms to my points. I cannot tell you why that particular detail was the one that crystallized something cold and final in my chest. Perhaps because it was so casually entitled, not even careful enough to use her own account. I went upstairs, showered, dressed for work. When Diane came down at 7:30, I kissed her cheek, told her I might be late, and left. I called David Chen from the car. I should give you the full picture of what I had absorbed in 9 years of marriage to a Harwood, because the accumulation matters. Individual bricks are unremarkable. It is only when you step back and see the wall they have built around you that the scale becomes clear. The first occasion I recorded in the small leather notebook I kept in the inside pocket of my work jacket was a dinner at Gerald Harwood's estate in Surrey, 4 months after Diane and I were married. There were 14 people at the table. Gerald was in his element, a property developer's property developer, the kind of man who communicates entirely in status signals and who gauges a room the way a contractor surveys a site. Quickly, clinically, pricing everything. He had asked me, with the particular brand of warmth that is actually condescension wrapped in linen, what I was working on. I told him about a cultural center commission in Bristol, a project I was proud of, a project that was genuinely difficult work. He nodded with the patience of a man waiting for you to stop speaking. Public sector, he said, to the table, not to me. Important work. The pause before important did all the damage he intended. Someone has to design the libraries. The table laughed. Diane smiled at her wine. I wrote it down that night. The date, the exact words, the pause. The second occasion was Christmas, 3 years into our marriage. Connor Harwood's Diane's brother, 4 years her junior, a man whose primary professional achievement was spending their father's money on boats, had presented me with a gift. A book. Architecture for Non-Architects. He'd found it genuinely funny. Thought it might help you explain what you do to normal people, he said, and punched my arm in the way that men do when they want to make a cruelty seem like affection. I thanked him. I smiled. I added it to the notebook. The third occasion, the one that I returned to most often, the one that completed the structure of my resolve, came 18 months ago at the Harwood Group's summer party at their Mayfair offices. Gerald had cornered me near the terrace bar. He had the specific glow of a man 3 drinks into a good mood and entirely uninhibited. "I'll be direct with you, Marcus," he said. "I appreciate that about myself." He did not appreciate it about anyone else. "Diane is a Harwood. That means something. That has always meant something. And I have watched you for 8 years, drawing your lines and attending your little industry events, and I think you are a decent man. Steady, reliable," he said, "reliable the way you would describe a utility vehicle. But decent and steady does not build an empire, and my daughter deserves an empire." He picked up his drink and walked back to his guests. I stood on the terrace for a while. Below me, the city moved at its ordinary pace, indifferent to Gerald Harwood's opinions about my professional worth. Somewhere in that city, embedded in its North Bank skyline, 41 stories of steel and glass and precision engineering were being assembled floor by floor, under my name and my vision and my company's capital. I reached into my inside jacket pocket, took out the key card. It was matte gunmetal gray, no logo, just a magnetic stripe and a small embossed M in the bottom right corner. Access pass to the Meridian's Development Command Center, my site office, my blueprint room, my private world. I ran my thumb across the embossed letter. Then I wrote down Gerald's words, verbatim, every one of them. Connor's contribution to the ledger came via the family group chat. He was a prolific contributor to the family group chat, a medium that suited him perfectly, allowing maximum performance with minimum accountability. The messages were easy to screenshot. October last year. Anyone know if Marcus is still doing the Bristol council thing? My cleaning lady's husband does council work. could probably get him a referral law February this year. Dad offered Marcus a position managing logistics for the Harwood Park development. He said he'd think about it, face with tears of joy, think about it. It's a yes or yes, mate, and then 3 weeks before the loyalty email, the one that I read twice to make sure I had not misunderstood. Honestly, feel bad for Diane sometimes. She could have married someone going somewhere. She married someone who draws the map. I saved them all. The offer from Gerald, the logistics manager position, deserves its own account. He had extended it in September over a family lunch as though he were doing me a kindness. Harwood Park was a mid-range residential development in the Midlands. The logistics manager role involved coordinating material deliveries and subcontractor schedules. It paid £38,000 a year. Something to consider, Gerald had said. More stability, more structure. And you'd be part of the family enterprise. He had smiled at Diane when he said it. She had smiled back. I had told him I would think about it. I had thought about it for approximately 4 seconds. By September of that year, Vane Group Holdings had already received 2 preliminary offers for licensing rights on the Meridian's design, architectural firms in Dubai and Singapore wanting to replicate elements of the structural system I had developed for the tower. Combined value of the 2 offers, £1.4 million. I had declined both. The design was not for sale, but I said none of this at the lunch. I thanked Gerald for the offer. I put the Harwood Group chat screenshot in my files. And I went back to my blueprints. The Meridian had begun as a thought experiment. 7 years ago, I had identified a parcel of decommissioned industrial land on the north bank of the river, a site that every major developer in the city had looked at and dismissed. The ground conditions were complex. The planning constraints were labyrinthine. The infrastructure requirements were, by conventional assessment, prohibitive. Every firm that had assessed it had walked away. The land had been sitting in municipal limbo for 11 years. I had spent 14 months designing a structural solution that turned the site's constraints into its primary architectural features. The complex ground conditions became the basis for an innovative pile foundation system, one that I subsequently patented. The infrastructure challenges shaped the building's services strategy in a way that reduced operational costs by 31% against comparable towers. What looked like obstacles were, in fact, the building's entire logic. I had incorporated Vane Group Holdings 4 years ago with £2.3 million in personal capital accumulated over 15 years of disciplined work. I had financed the land acquisition and early-stage development with a structured loan facility from 2 private investors, both introduced by David Chen, both sworn to confidentiality under agreement. I had done all of this quietly, methodically, in the hours before Diane woke up and after she went to bed, at a desk in the 3rd-floor study that she never entered because she found architectural drawings, in her words, deeply uninteresting. She was not wrong. They are deeply interesting to me, which had always been the relevant point. On the night of the loyalty email, after Diane had gone upstairs, I sat at that desk and opened the Vane Group Holdings secure portal on my laptop. The latest valuation report had been submitted by our appointed surveyors 2 days prior. Current project valuation at completion, £47,300,000. Current Marcus Vane equity stake, 68%. I looked at the number for a long time. Then I took out the gunmetal key card and placed it on the desk beside the laptop. The embossed M caught the lamplight. Gerald Harwood's estate, according to the industry publication that had profiled him the previous spring, was valued at approximately £31 million. He had taken 40 years to build it. I closed the portal. I took the key card back. I went to bed. David Chen had been my structural engineering partner since my first year of practice. He was the kind of man who communicated in facts and geometry and who regarded excessive emotion approximately the way he regarded poor load calculations, as a structural liability. He was also the most loyal person I had ever known and the only individual outside of my solicitor who knew the full scope of Vane Group Holdings. I called him from the car on the morning of the loyalty email. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a moment, the quality of silence that with David indicated he was running calculations. The gala, he said. He was right immediately. The Harwood Group annual charity gala was 8 weeks away. Gerald hosted it every December at the Halcyon Grand Hotel, the same building where his daughter had been meeting her lover for 6 months, using her husband's loyalty points to pay for the room. The venue had been booked before I had ever known about the check-ins. The irony was architectural in its precision. "That's where you do it," David said. It was not a question. I told him what I needed. He took notes. He asked 2 clarifying questions, then he said, "Marcus, for what it's worth, what they think of you has always been wrong. Tonight just starts being provable." It was the longest personal statement I had ever heard him make. I thanked him and rang off. Over the following 8 weeks, David coordinated 3 things on my behalf. He arranged for the architectural quarterly profile of the Meridian, already commissioned, originally planned for the spring issue, to be brought forward to the December edition. He confirmed with our PR firm that the City Council's formal planning approval notice, with the project name, the developer's name, and the valuation figure, would be publicly listed on the Planning Authority's website no later than December 11th. And he arranged for a leather portfolio, black, unbranded, containing a specific set of documents, to be brought to the gala by him personally, arriving at 8:15 p.m. I attended the preceding 8 weeks of family life in my usual way. Present, steady, unremarkable. I said nothing about the hotel records. I said nothing about the phone call I had overheard in July. I designed, I drew. I went to site, I came home. Diane told me she was working late on 4 more Thursdays. I noted them in the leather notebook. The Harwood Charity Gala was held on December 14th. Black tie, 200 guests. The ballroom of the Halcyon Grand, which I had never entered before that evening despite being, apparently, a loyalty member in good standing. I dressed carefully, a charcoal evening suit, cut close. No tie pin, no pocket square, no cufflinks with initials, nothing that announced itself. I checked the inside pocket of the jacket. The gunmetal key card was there. I had sent 2 things in advance of the evening. The first was a letter to Gerald Harwood's solicitor, delivered by hand, informing him that as of December 12th, Vane Group Holdings had been publicly registered as the developer of record for the Meridian project, and that the Planning Authority's approval notice was now publicly accessible on the Council's website. No further explanation, just the facts in clear language with the relevant web address. The second was a call to my own solicitor, who had prepared a specific document, a 1-page summary of Vane Group Holdings' current corporate structure, asset valuation, and Marcus Vane's equity position, notarized, printed on headed paper, ready for the portfolio David would bring at 8:15. I also had in the breast pocket of my jacket a folded copy of the loyalty points email, 23 check-ins, the dates, the room charges, printed on plain paper, nothing dramatic. Evidence is most effective when it is quiet. I arrived at the Halcyon Grand at 7:45. I handed my coat to the attendant. I accepted a glass of champagne I did not drink, and I went to find my wife and her family. They were at the far end of the reception room in the configuration they always assumed in public, Gerald at the center, Connor to his left performing loudness for a group of younger guests, Diane beside her father, polished and composed in a way that I now understood differently than I once had. Gerald saw me first. He raised his glass in the minimal acknowledgement he reserved for people he considered peripheral to the evening. Connor clapped me on the back with the familiar aggressive warmth that substitutes in men like him for actual feeling. "Marcus, didn't know if you'd make it, thought you might be in Bristol drawing a bus shelter." He laughed. 2 of his friends laughed. Diane smiled at something just past my shoulder. "I wouldn't have missed it," I said. I said very little for the first 30 minutes. I accepted a second glass of champagne and held it. I watched the room. Gerald circulated with the ease of a man in his element, greeting guests by name, performing magnanimity, telling the story of the gala's charitable recipients with the practiced cadence of a man who had told it many times. He was good at this. I had always acknowledged that. He built things and he built rooms and he understood the architecture of a social occasion with genuine skill. At 8:10, Diane touched my arm and said she needed to speak to someone and would be back. I watched her cross the room to a group near the bar. A man in a dark suit half-turned at her approach. I recognized the angle of his attention, the particular quality of readiness in a person who has been waiting for someone. I felt nothing shift in me. The fracture had happened months ago. I was here to close the building, not to watch it fall. At 8:14, my phone vibrated once. "David here, South Entrance." Gerald was mid-speech when I approached, a small toast he'd gathered 8 or 9 guests for, something about resilience and community. The Harwood patriarch in full performance. I waited. When the small cluster applauded and began to disperse, I stepped forward. "Gerald, could I have a few minutes? I have something I'd like to share with the family." He looked at me with the patient, slightly puzzled expression of a man who cannot conceive of what a person like me might have worth sharing. "Of course," he said. He gestured to Connor. Connor called Diane over with a wave. The four of us stood in a loose semicircle near the east windows, the city lights of the river visible through the glass behind me. I reached into my inside pocket and took out the gunmetal key card. I held it for a moment between my thumb and forefinger, then placed it flat on the narrow side table beside us. "I've been drawing lines on paper for other people to build," I said, looking at Gerald. "Those were your words. 18 months ago at your summer party, I wrote them down." Gerald's expression did not change. He was waiting to hear the point. "My structural engineer is joining us in a moment. He has a portfolio I'd like you to look at." In the meantime, I reached into my breast pocket and removed the folded notarized document. I unfolded it and placed it on the table beside the key card. "This is a summary of Vane Group Holdings, a company I incorporated 4 years ago. The Meridian, the mixed-use development tower currently in construction phase on the North Bank, is a Vane Group Holdings project. I am the primary developer and majority owner. The project's completion valuation, as assessed by chartered surveyors on November 18th of this year, is £47.3 million. The first silence. Connor looked at the document the way people look at something they don't yet have the category for. Gerald looked at me. "The Meridian," he said carefully. "The North Bank project. Yes, that's as that site has been in planning for over a decade. Every major firm in the city walked away from it. Yes, the ground conditions were considered prohibitive. I designed a foundation system that resolved the issue. I patented the system in 2021. The planning authority granted full approval on December 9th. The listing is publicly accessible." I paused. David had appeared at the edge of the group, portfolio under his arm, and gave me a single slight nod. "Gerald," I continued, "you offered me a position at Harwood Park last September. Logistics manager, $38,000 a year. You said it would give me more stability, more structure." I looked at him steadily. By that point, Vane Group Holdings had declined 2 international licensing offers for the Meridian structural design worth a combined £1.4 million. I thought the numbers were relevant context. Gerald's glass had stopped moving. For the first time in 9 years, I had his complete and involuntary attention. Connor said nothing. Connor, for possibly the first time in his adult life, appeared to have genuinely nothing to say. I turned to Diane. "I received this in November," I said, and removed the folded loyalty email from my pocket. I placed it on the table beside the other documents. "It's a quarterly summary from the Harwood Prestige Rewards Program. The account is in my name. 23 check-ins at this hotel in the past 6 months, always on Thursdays. Always on evenings. You told me you were working late on the gala audit." I let a moment pass. "You charged the rooms to my points account." Diane's face changed in the way that faces change when a story that has been managed very carefully for a very long time encounters a fact it cannot accommodate. "Marcus, I'm not raising my voice," I said. "I'm not making a scene. I'm simply placing the information on the table, alongside the rest of it, so that everyone present has the complete picture." I looked at Gerald one final time. "You said Diane deserved an empire," I said. "You were right about one thing, Gerald. I draw lines. Tonight I drew the final one." I picked up the key card. I put it back in my pocket. And I walked to the south exit, where David was waiting with my coat. What followed happened with the quiet inevitability of a well-engineered structure meeting its designed load. The architectural quarterly profile of the Meridian ran in the December issue. The cover. "The quiet titan of the North Bank," David's phrase, not mine, though I allowed it. The article detailed the project history, the patented foundation system, and the developer, Marcus Vane, Vane Group Holdings. It was read by everyone in the industry within 48 hours. It was read by the Harwood family. I was informed by a mutual friend within 24. Gerald Harwood had spent 9 years positioning himself in the property development community as a man of extraordinary judgment. The story that circulated quietly, as these things do, through industry lunches and professional networks, was that he had, for 9 years, dismissed and condescended to the man who would build the city's most significant private development in over a decade. Had offered him a logistics management role 3 months before the project's planning approval became public record. Several of his long-standing business contacts found this, I understand, difficult to reconcile with the image Gerald had carefully constructed of himself. Two declined to renew partnership agreements that were up for renegotiation in January. Gerald did not publicly acknowledge the magazine profile. He did not need to. His silence said everything. Connor deleted his contributions to the family group chat. He drew the map message, the cleaning lady's husband joke, the logistics referral, all gone within 12 hours of the gala. This was, I noted, slightly too late as I had screenshots of every one of them. His social circle, built largely on borrowed Harwood status and the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences, contracted noticeably in the weeks that followed, as the story of the gala spread in the way that stories spread among people who had once laughed along. The divorce was clean in the legal sense, though no divorce is clean in the other senses. My solicitor had been thorough. The financial settlement was straightforward. Diane had no claim against Vane Group Holdings, which had been incorporated and operating independently before and throughout the marriage with no marital funds involved. She retained the Kensington townhouse, the joint account, and her Harwood family inheritance. She lost a great deal more that had no monetary value and is therefore beyond the scope of this account. The man she had been meeting at the Halcyon Grand on 23 Thursday evenings had, I learned through mutual connections, ended things shortly after the gala. People who choose partners for status are, as a general rule, sensitive to changes in the status calculation. 7 months after the gala, I received a letter, handwritten, posted, not emailed, which told me it had taken effort, which was the point of sending it that way. It was from Diane. It was 3 paragraphs. She did not ask for anything. She did not offer an explanation or a justification or a context that was meant to transfer some portion of the fault back to me. She simply said that she had spent 9 years measuring everything by her father's scale, including me, and that she understood now the cost of that to both of us. She said she had begun working a real job, her own income, a position at a charitable foundation she had identified herself without her father's assistance. She said she had started reading again in the evenings. She did not mention the west-facing sofa, but I thought of it. The last line, "I am not writing because I expect anything from you, Marcus. I'm writing because you were always honest with me and I was not always honest with you, and that gap is something I need to close. For myself, not for you." I read it twice. I felt something that was not quite forgiveness and not quite its absence, something more like the acceptance of the full structure of a thing, its weight and its dimensions, without needing it to be other than it was. I put the letter in the 3rd drawer of my desk. I did not reply. I did not delete it. The Meridian topped out in March. I stood on the 41st floor with David and the site manager and watched the river below us, moving as it always has, indifferent to the structures men build above it. The wind up there is remarkable. It has a quality that the ground never does, an indifference to everything except the basic facts of physics. David said, "Solid, genuinely solid work, Marcus." From David, this was an oration. I have thought in the months since about what this story is actually about. I do not think it is a story about revenge. I think it is a story about foundations, the real ones, the ones you choose without an audience, the ones you maintain through years of work and patience and the private discipline of building something true. Gerald Harwood built an empire by his own account. I built a building. What I learned is that the difference between those two things is not the scale. It is the quality of the ground beneath you and whether you are honest about it. A building raised on vanity sinks eventually. A building raised on accurate understanding of the ground, its complexity, its demands, its reality stands. That is, as it happens, both an architectural principle and everything else. Marcus's story is a powerful reminder that what is built in silence and integrity does not need to announce itself. True foundations in architecture and in character do not require an audience. They simply hold. We all encounter people who measure us by a scale that was never calibrated to see what we actually are. The question Marcus's story asks is, when that happens, do you accept their measure or do you trust the ground beneath you and keep building? What do you think? Did Marcus handle the gala the right way, or should he have walked away earlier and said nothing? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one, and every subscription helps us bring them to you. Thank you for being here.